Last night we spoke to the outstanding Australian natural scientist, Professor Ian Plimer. I'm sure it won't surprise you that so desperate are these climate change net zero apologists that they've dragged out Professor Tim Flannery, to bolster the case for net zero emissions. He calls himself Professor, and he calls himself an internationally acclaimed scientist, explorer and conservationist. Is this the same Flannery who in 2005 warned that global warming was drying out Sydney? And he said, quote, "We've just seen drought, and particularly regions like Sydney and the Warragamba catchment," unquote. You don't need to tell you what has happened this year. He further said, Professor Flannery, quote, "There are only 2 years water supply at Warragamba Dam, and if the computer models are right, then drought conditions will become permanent in Eastern Australia," unquote. You dunce. By 2007, the alarmism had risen to apocalyptic levels. Global warming, he said, was drying up the rain and baking the soil. Quote, "So even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river systems," unquote. So government swallowed this and built woefully expensive desalination plants, made him the Australian of the Year. The desalination plants are now mothballed because the rains did come, and parts of Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have been flooded. Dams in Brisbane, Sydney and Canberra overflowing. But now Flannery has stuck his head up again. Václav Klaus is a Czech economist and politician who was the second president of the Czech Republic for 10 years. He has quite rightly said, and I quote, "I don't believe in the innocence of global warming alarmists. They don't care about the environment. They just misuse it in their crusade, which aims at limiting our freedom and prosperity." He said, "I don't want to make comparisons of their ideology with communism, but I do see many similarities." Then President Klaus said, "It is a new variant for the activist political left, and I spent all my life fighting such a political thinking because I lived in such a political system." Well, you might remember under Julia Gillard's prime ministership, she declined an invitation to meet with President Klaus. No wonder. But back to Flannery. He's now calling upon the Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, to reconsider 19 fossil fuel projects assessed by the previous government, including the Narrabri underground coal mine and Woodside's Northwest Shelf extension. And the arrogance of Flannery when he says science is on their side. That's on the side of the Environment Council of Central Queensland, which wants Tanya Plibersek to reconsider these projects because Flannery says that we must get to net zero emissions as fast as possible, and that, quote, "the minister must heed the advice of the country's leading scientists," unquote. What's that mean? Well, 100 scientists and academics have called for emissions from new coal and gas projects to be considered in the approvals process. Heed the science, they're saying. And they support this legal move by the Environment Council of Central Queensland for further environmental assessments of new gas and coal projects, and, quote, "Every tonne of greenhouse gas emissions and every fraction of a degree of warming is a blow to the health of our ecosystems and economy, and any coal or gas project will dangerously worsen climate change," unquote. Well, Flannery is one of the letter's signatories, who said leaders had a moral responsibility to consider emissions from fossil fuels even when they are exported. So will we be punished for exporting our coal overseas, which exports reach $110 billion this financial year?